Right now, somewhere on Earth, 8 billion people are living their lives, driving to work, cooking dinner, charging their phones, keeping the entire machinery of civilization quietly running. Now imagine all of them vanish. Instantly. No warning, no explanation, no bodies left behind. Every human being on the planet, just gone. The buildings stay. The cars stay, engines still running in some cases. The power plants stay, humming along exactly as they were the moment before. Every pet, every farm animal, every houseplant, still here, still alive, suddenly alone. This isn't a story about what killed us. It's a story about what happens to everything we built, once there's no one left to maintain it. And the answer unfolds on a timeline most people never think about. Not in movie-style chaos over a few dramatic days, but in a slow, methodical process that plays out over a single day, a single week, a single month, a decade, a century, and finally, 1,000 years. Some things collapse almost immediately. Others take centuries to even begin decaying. A few, a very few, might outlast the planet itself. Let's walk through it, year by year, and watch an entire civilization quietly come undone. The first day is deceptively quiet. Nothing dramatic collapses right away, but the countdown has already started. Planes currently in the air, flying on autopilot, continue on their programmed routes until they run out of fuel or their systems require a human correction they'll never receive. Most will eventually crash, some hundreds of kilometers from where they took off, their final destination decided entirely by physics rather than any pilot. Power plants tell a more complicated story depending on their type. Most fossil fuel and natural gas plants are designed with automatic safety shutdowns. Without human operators monitoring fuel levels and system checks, many begin powering down within hours, some almost immediately as safety systems detect anomalies with no one responding to alerts. Nuclear power plants are the most concerning piece of day one. Modern reactors have extensive automated safety systems designed specifically for scenarios where operators can't respond, and most will successfully shut down into a safe state. But without ongoing human maintenance of backup cooling systems and generators, some plants, particularly older or less automated designs, face a real risk of overheating in the days that follow, an early hint of the kind of danger that unattended infrastructure poses. In cities, refrigeration units keep running on emergency backup power for as long as fuel reserves and battery systems last. Traffic lights continue cycling to empty intersections. Sprinkler systems still water lawns nobody will ever walk across again. Pets are perhaps the most immediate tragedy of day one. Dogs and cats left inside homes and apartments, confused and increasingly hungry, some fortunate enough to be let out by automatic doors or broken windows, most simply waiting for someone who is never coming back. Livestock face their own crisis almost instantly. Factory farms, entirely dependent on automated feeding and water systems, will see those systems begin failing within days as fuel and power run out. The first quiet mass die-off of this new world, happening almost unnoticed on day one. By the end of the first week, the quiet has a different texture to it. The initial mechanical momentum of civilization is starting to run out. Most fossil fuel power plants have now shut down completely, either through automated safety protocols or simply running out of fuel that no one is there to replenish. Cities begin losing power in waves, some regions going dark within days, others, connected to more resilient grids or renewable sources, holding on a little longer. Without electricity, refrigeration fails everywhere. Grocery stores, restaurants, and home kitchens across the planet begin filling with the smell of spoiling food, an unglamorous but universal marker of exactly how much of daily life depended on constant, invisible upkeep. Water systems begin to falter too. Most municipal water treatment and pumping systems rely on electricity, meaning that within about a week, running water stops in most major cities, and water towers slowly drain without pumps to refill them. Domesticated animals face the harshest week yet. Pets that couldn't escape confined spaces largely don't survive this stretch. Farm animals fortunate enough to be in open pastures start figuring out how to forage on their own, an early, brutal step back towards something closer to their wild ancestors. Meanwhile, wild animals in urban areas are already noticing the change. Rats, Pigeons and other opportunistic species that thrived on human waste begin ranging further into empty buildings, scouting territory that, until 7 days ago, was aggressively defended by an entirely different species. 1 month in, and the last remnants of normal are essentially gone. Nearly every power grid on the planet has now failed, taking down the pumps that keep major dams and water systems in check. In cities built below sea level or protected by levees, places like New Orleans or parts of the Netherlands, flooding begins as pumping stations that once ran around the clock finally go silent. Nuclear power plants that made it through the first week now face their most dangerous stretch. Spent fuel pools, which require continuous active cooling, become a serious long-term hazard once backup power finally runs out completely. One of the most sobering technical realities of a world without human maintenance, and a slow-motion crisis that experts consider one of the most likely sources of significant environmental contamination in this entire scenario. Fires become a growing danger too, ironically because there's no one left to fight them. Stoves left on, electrical faults, and lightning strikes that would normally be handled by fire departments within minutes now burn unchecked, sometimes for days, spreading through dry vegetation into abandoned neighborhoods. Nature is already visibly creeping back. Weeds push up through cracks in sidewalks and parking lots. Ivy and vines begin climbing the sides of buildings that used to have maintenance crews trimming them back weekly. Small trees start sprouting in neglected rain gutters and rooftop drainage systems. It's not dramatic collapse yet. No crumbling skyscrapers, no total ruins. Just the first unmistakable signs that the planet is beginning, patiently, to take its infrastructure back. A full year later, and the change has become impossible to ignore, even from a distance. Most of the world's major cities have gone completely dark. The handful of hydroelectric dams that don't require active management might still be generating power to an empty grid, but virtually nothing is left to receive it. Roads, unmaintained through an entire cycle of seasons, freezing winters, scorching summers, heavy rains, begin cracking apart in earnest. Asphalt, without regular repaving, develops deep fissures that plants exploit almost immediately, turning highways into strange, linear gardens. Farmland, freed from herbicides and constant tilling, is being aggressively reclaimed by whatever grows fastest, usually hardy weeds and grasses at first, eventually giving way to shrubs and pioneer tree species in wetter climates. Animal populations are shifting dramatically. Species that struggled to survive alongside dense human populations, certain birds of prey, larger mammals pushed out of urban-adjacent habitats, are already beginning to reappear in areas they hadn't been seen in decades. Meanwhile, domesticated species left behind, particularly livestock breeds selectively bred for docility rather than survival, are declining sharply, unable to compete with more adaptable wild and feral populations. 1 year isn't long enough to erase civilization, but it's plenty long enough to make it clear that civilization, without constant human effort, was never as permanent as it looked. 10 years in, and cities have started to genuinely resemble ruins rather than empty versions of themselves. Wooden structures, the vast majority of residential housing in North America, for example, are deteriorating badly. Roofs leak, then collapse. Without gutters being cleared, water damage works its way steadily into support beams. Many suburban homes, especially in wetter climates, are already partially collapsed or seriously structurally compromised. Steel and concrete fare somewhat better, but not indefinitely. Steel frame buildings are vulnerable to rust, particularly at any point exposed to consistent moisture, and once structural steel begins to weaken, entire sections of buildings can fail. Concrete, meanwhile, faces its own quiet enemy, water seeping into microscopic cracks, freezing and expanding through winter cycles, gradually breaking the material apart from the inside. Bridges, especially those requiring regular maintenance and inspection, become increasingly dangerous, some collapsing outright as rust and decay work through crucial support cables and joints. Forests have made serious inroads into former urban areas by this point, particularly in temperate, wetter climates where plant growth is aggressive. Cities in places like the northeastern United States or Western Europe show trees growing directly through the floors of ground-level buildings whose windows have long since shattered. Domesticated animal populations have essentially stabilized into new patterns by year 10. Surviving livestock and pets have either gone fully feral, interbred with wild relatives, or died out in areas without accessible food sources. Meanwhile, wild animal populations, freed from hunting pressure, road traffic, and habitat destruction, are visibly rebounding in many regions, a strange, quiet silver lining tucked inside an otherwise sobering decade. A century later, and the vast majority of what humanity built above ground is gone or unrecognizable. Most wooden buildings have completely collapsed by now, reduced to overgrown mounds barely distinguishable from the surrounding landscape. Even many steel and concrete structures have failed. A century of rust, freeze-thaw cycles, and unchecked plant growth is more than enough to bring down all but the most robustly engineered buildings. Some structures do beat the odds. Certain modern skyscrapers, particularly those built with more corrosion-resistant materials and better drainage design, may still be standing, though badly damaged and unsafe, their lower floors thoroughly reclaimed by forest. Stone structures fare dramatically better than anything else. Ancient stone architecture has already proven, over thousands of real-world years, that it can outlast almost everything humans build with modern materials. Roads have almost entirely disappeared under a century of plant growth, visible now mostly as faint linear clearings that ecologists studying the landscape might recognize, but which would be completely invisible to anyone without that specific knowledge. Dams without maintenance have mostly failed by this point, unable to withstand a century of unmanaged water pressure, sediment buildup, and structural decay, some catastrophically, reshaping entire river valleys and wetland ecosystems in the process. Wildlife, meanwhile, has settled into something resembling a genuinely wild equilibrium. Former cities have effectively become new forests and grasslands, supporting healthy, diverse animal populations that show no trace of the dense human settlements that once stood there. It's arguably one of the most striking parts of the entire timeline. After just 100 years, a blink of an eye in geological terms, nature doesn't just recover. In most places, it thrives. 1,000 years later, and almost nothing above ground remains to suggest that a global civilization ever existed here at all. Nearly every building humanity ever constructed has collapsed, decayed, or been fully absorbed back into the landscape. What's left isn't rubble in any recognizable sense. It's low mounds, buried foundations, and scattered fragments that would require deliberate archaeological excavation to even identify as artificial. The handful of structures that survive are the ones humanity built specifically to last. Massive stone monuments, deep underground structures protected from weather and plant growth, and a small number of engineering marvels built with almost absurd structural overengineering. Even these are heavily weathered, half-buried, or partially collapsed, recognizable as human-made only to a trained eye. Plastic, one of the most stubbornly persistent materials humanity ever created, is still around in fragmented form, though 1,000 years of UV exposure, physical weathering, and slow microbial breakdown has reduced most of it to microplastic particles scattered through soil and sediment, an invisible but lasting chemical fingerprint of an entire civilization. Nuclear waste storage sites, if they haven't already failed catastrophically in earlier centuries, remain one of the few genuinely dangerous places left on Earth, sealed, buried, and still radioactive, patiently waiting out timelines measured in tens of thousands of years rather than mere hundreds. Above ground, the planet looks remarkably close to how it might have looked before humans existed at all. Thick forests where cities once stood, rivers running their natural courses again, wildlife populations fully recovered and thriving. The only real evidence of an entire global civilization, at this point, is buried underground, scattered as microscopic particles, or locked away in secure structures never meant to be opened again. A few traces of humanity might genuinely outlast almost everything else on this list, some by a staggering margin. Satellites in high, stable orbits face essentially no atmospheric drag and no maintenance requirements to simply keep existing. Long after every building on Earth's surface has crumbled, a number of defunct satellites could still be silently circling the planet, some potentially for millions of years, slowly becoming the longest-lasting physical artifacts humanity ever created. The spacecraft and landers left behind on the moon face similarly minimal decay pressure, no atmosphere, no weather, no plant growth. Footprints left by astronauts, along with equipment and flags left on the lunar surface, could realistically remain almost perfectly preserved for millions of years, an eerie, untouched museum exhibit with no one left to visit it. Back on Earth, deep mining shafts and certain nuclear waste storage facilities, engineered specifically to remain sealed and stable for tens of thousands of years, represent some of the longest-lasting, deliberately constructed structures in human history, designed, ironically, for a threat scenario disturbingly similar to the one we've just walked through. Even radio waves count, in a strange sense. Every television broadcast, every radio transmission, every deep space signal humanity ever sent is still traveling outward through the universe at the speed of light, an ever-expanding sphere of evidence that intelligent life briefly existed here, expanding forever, whether or not anyone is ever out there to receive it. In the end, it's not our buildings or our cities that last the longest. It's the faintest, least physical traces, signals, footprints in airless dust, and quiet machines drifting in orbit that outlive everything else we ever built. There's a reason this exact thought experiment, humans vanishing, nature reclaiming everything, has become one of the most popular science scenarios ever explored, from documentaries to books to endless online discussions. Part of it is genuinely educational. Watching this imagined timeline unfold forces you to notice just how much invisible, constant effort goes into keeping the ordinary world running. The maintenance crews, the power grid operators, the people quietly clearing storm drains, none of whom get much attention until suddenly. In this scenario, they're the ones missing. Part of it is something closer to humility. It's genuinely striking to realize that a civilization capable of skyscrapers, satellites, and nuclear power could be reduced to overgrown mounds within a single century, once nobody's left to actively maintain it. It reframes permanent as a word that only ever meant maintained, not eternal. And part of it, honestly, is a strange kind of hope. This isn't a story about the planet being destroyed. It's a story about the planet healing, remarkably fast, the moment the pressure of billions of people is removed. Rivers run clean again. Forests return. Animal populations recover in numbers most conservationists today can only dream about. It's not really a story about extinction at all. It's a story about resilience, just not necessarily ours. One day, 1 week, 1 month, 10 years, 100, 1,000. It's a strange thing to sit with, watching an entire civilization quietly dissolve back into the planet it came from. Nothing in this scenario needed an explosion, a war, or a catastrophe. Just the simple, quiet removal of the one species that spent thousands of years actively fighting to keep entropy, rust, and forest growth at bay. The moment that effort stops, the outcome isn't really in question. It's just a matter of time. There's something oddly clarifying about that. Every single thing we consider permanent, our homes, our cities, our roads, was never actually permanent at all. It was maintained, every single day, by someone, somewhere, doing work most of us never think twice about. And maybe that's the real takeaway from a thought experiment like this one. Not that humanity is fragile, exactly, but that everything we build is a constant, ongoing conversation with a planet that's patiently waiting to take it all back the moment we stop talking. The buildings would fall, the roads would vanish, the forests would return, and the Earth, quietly, would just keep going, with or without us.